Okay, so my name is Natalie Green. Welcome to our 5th global webinar series titled The Role of EMI in Enhancing Student Support and Teacher Education in EMI Contexts. It's 11 o'clock UK time, but I say good morning, afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It's going to be a different time zone for you. And you're all very welcome, and it's great to see so many of you with us today, and we're absolutely delighted to have our 2 speakers with us today as well. I'm the events coordinator, and from the committee we also have Eileen, who is the other events coordinator, Ben, our web coordinator, and Mustafa, our committee coordinator. So our presenters today are Professor Ursula Wingate and Professor Karen Ottewell, and the session will last around an hour and a half. We will have one presentation first, then the other, and then there will be time for Q&A at the end. Eileen and I will be monitoring the chat for questions for the Q&A. So just remember that the meeting is being recorded and it will be made available on our website and on our YouTube channel at a later date. So this is just to remind you that if you prefer not to be recorded, then to keep your camera switched off so that only your icon is visible. So now I'm going to hand over to Eileen to introduce our presenters.
Right. Thank you, Natalie. I am super honored to be presenting 2 very eminent scholars among us, and I'm sure their talks will be exciting. Ursula actually does not need introducing, but let me do my best. Ursula Wingate is a professor of language education in School of Education, Communication and Society at King's College London. She's a renowned, widely cited scholar whose research explores theoretical and pedagogical frameworks for developing students' academic literacy, English language policy and practice, and approaches to language teaching. Her recent work has advanced genre-based methods for teaching academic literacy in higher education, basically using student text corpora to design discipline-specific instructional materials. Building on her latest project on perceptions and practices around GenAI tools, she has proposed pedagogies that empower students to use GenAI ethically and effectively in their academic writing. In this talk today, Professor Wingate challenges the widespread representation of EMI as a new phenomenon, which continues to face challenges in identifying effective approaches to student support and teacher development. Professor Karen Ottewell is Acting Director of the Language Center and Director of Academic Development and Training for International Students at the University of Cambridge. And in this role, Professor Ottewell leads programs that support international students in strengthening the academic skills needed to survive in an English medium university environment. Karen's expertise lies in the cultural influences on writing, the development of postgraduate written articulacy, assessment design, and language assessment literacy. As executive member for English language teaching on the University Council for Languages, she's committed to raising awareness of the key challenges currently facing the EAP sector. Building on Professor Wingate's discussion, Professor Karen Ottewell will present 2 practical insights drawn from her experience with postgraduate students at Cambridge. So we warmly welcome them and leave the floor to Ursula.
First, thank you very much for the very kind introduction, and to the committee for inviting me to speak at this webinar. I'm a bit nervous because I don't normally work with Zoom. So please give me a moment to call up my presentation. And there it is. So in my presentation today, my main argument will be that in multilingual universities, be it in Anglophone countries or non-Anglophone countries, EAP has a crucial role to play, not only in the development of students' academic literacy, but also in teacher education. So after I give you some background information, I pursue the three objectives of my talk. The first one is to challenge the segregation between the fields of EAP and EMI. The second is to emphasize EAP's role in academic literacy development and teacher education. And thirdly, to promote efforts to strengthen the institutional status of EAP. Now, there are two issues that I find concerning. The first issue is that in the EMI literature, EMI is widely presented as a new phenomenon. And this is very obvious in the frequent infancy claims. For instance, Galloway and Rose wrote in 2021 that EMA research is in a relative stage of infancy in terms of understanding how to confront students' academic and language-related challenges. These infancy claims have also been made in relation to teacher education. And there I am puzzled, I must say, because EAP has a decades-long tradition of theory building, research, and development of instructional approaches to confront these challenges that students experience when studying at university. And it also has a long tradition in teacher education. So I reject this new phenomenon perspective. I'm also disturbed by finding explanations of EAP and EMI literature that actually represent a serious misconception of EAP. For instance, Darfouz writes in 2021 that in EAP, academic language is viewed as a generic set of skills that can be acquired more or less independently of the content area where they will be used. So that's a perception of EAP as a skills approach, where it is all about language skills and study skills. And this is something I want to refute. Further to the background, another problem is that EMI research and publications seem to be stuck with identifying challenges, particularly students' language challenges, but not offering or even considering practical solutions to tackling these challenges. And this is very well expressed in a recent article by Akintioglu. I told you I'd had problems with the pronunciation, where he says, EMI research seems to be condensed on problem identification and trends, focusing on English language issues, pedagogical challenges, and so on. This narrow focus appears to have reached a saturation point, and I couldn't agree more. So Akintioglu also proposes in this paper deprofessionalization of EMI and argues that EMI teacher training lacks, or EMI teachers lack necessary training, and existing language programs are generic and fragmented. So this all means, this situation means that EAP and the long tradition and experience of EAP is ignored. If you address challenges, but don't look for solutions, that means ignoring EAP. So there's a problem with ignoring EAP and its decade-long experience. First of all, it would mean that in EMI, the wheel would need to be reinvented. So you start from scratch in thinking about pedagogical approaches. It prevents also knowledge and exchange and collaboration between the two domains. And this kind of segregation prevents joint efforts between EAP and EMI scholars and practitioners for enhancing the status of EAP. I'm just so further challenging this segregation between the fields of EAP and EMI. This segregation is underpinned by a widely used definition by Ernesto Macaro of EMI. And he defines EMI as the use of English to teach academic subjects in countries or jurisdictions where the first language of the majority of the population is not English. Now, I cannot accept this definition at all. Look at Anglophone countries and the university sector in Anglophone countries, particularly the postgraduate sector, where the majority of students are not native speakers of English, and very often their teachers aren't either. So just read in The Guardian that in the UK, 33% of all university teachers are not English. So when we talk about Anglophone countries and their university higher education sector, we're talking about multilingual settings. So what we are teaching through English as a medium instruction, mainly now to students who are not English native speakers. Sorry. The second issue I want to dispute is that EMI scholars typically include into their EMI sphere what Willens called old EMI. Now, what is old EMI? That refers to post-colonial regions such as Hong Kong or Singapore, where higher education, and now I quote Willens, has typically only ever been available through the language of the former colonizers. So English EMI is a very century-old tradition in the former colonies and now post-colonial regions. By contrast, new EMI refers to settings where studying through the medium of English is, as Willens put it, a neoliberal choice. So the so-called old EMI has been for many decades the study of ESP and EAP scholars who carried out research and developed approaches to help those students who had to study through the medium of English. Very famous people are, for instance, John Flowerdew or Ken Hyland, who have done a big chunk of their research in old EMI, that is Hong Kong and areas like Hong Kong. So what disturbs me is that old EMI is integrated into the phenomenon or new phenomenon of EMI by EMI scholars without recognizing the extensive work that has been done by ESP and EAP scholars. And it's concerning that this clear-cut distinction between the two fields might conceal substantial convergences between EMI and EAP, particularly in the area of student support on teacher education. So now I come to the misconception of what EAP is that I come across in the EMI literature quite regularly. Let's go back to the origins of EAP and to its history. The history is that EAP is a child of the parent discipline ESP, English for Specific Purposes, which emerged in the 1960s. And Strevens, one of the founding ESP scholars, summarized the essential principles of ESP as meeting the specific needs of the learner, relating content to particular disciplines, and analyzing the language used in the discipline's activities. And these principles, EAP has emerged as an own domain from ESP in the early 2000s, but closely adhered to ESP's principles. And that is obvious in the definition by Hyland and Hamp-Lyons, the founding editors of the Journal of English for Academic Purposes, who define EAP as referring to language research and instruction that focuses on the specific communicative needs and practices of particular groups in academic contexts. And going on, they say that the fact that we are interested in what people do in their specific academic context, that this takes practitioners beyond preparing learners to study in English to developing new kinds of literacy, equipping students with the communicative skills to participate in their disciplines. So that is the original mission of EAP, nothing to do with skills being taught out of context. So to summarize, EAP's core mission is developing the literacies that students need to access and produce disciplinary knowledge. And that means instruction has to be discipline-specific, inclusive. It shouldn't be to non-native speakers only, because every student is coming to university is a novice in the communication of their discipline. It should be embedded into the discipline. It can't be separated from it, and it should be based off genre analysis. Genre analysis is the, I would say, signature pedagogy of EAP. And it should be based on the collaboration between EAP practitioners and subject lecturers, because EAP practitioners need to understand discipline-specific language of disciplines they might be unfamiliar with, and therefore they need the help of the information from subject lecturers. But as I will show in a moment, this collaboration can be mutually beneficial, because subject lecturers can also learn a lot from EAP practitioners. So this is EAP how it should be. However, what is the reality? The reality is that it seems to me that in many contexts, the main business of EAP is now the pre-sessionals, which is important, lucrative, and self-sustaining, and therefore it brings in a lot of money and is therefore seen as a valuable service by university managers. As Tippett and Chapman said in their book in 2023, the pre-sessional also brings in many universities, brings in enough funds to allow to run in-sessional support, which is more expensive, but usually not well funded by university. So, but we must say that in reality, English for general academic purposes is the predominant provision, and we do not have much attention to the discipline-specific inclusive stuff. It's also that there is a perception of EAP as a remedial service. English Language Center sets these units apart from academic departments. It makes it look like a service provision. The status of EAP practitioners is not high enough in many universities. They are on professional rather than academic contracts, and increasingly they are on hourly contracts and in very precarious situations, only hired for processional courses and then unemployed for the rest of the year. So the reality of EAP is in universities isn't great. And that's why I think that both EMI practitioners and scholars and EAP practitioners and scholars have to join forces to fight for a better status of EAP in the university. Now, how can we strengthen the Mustafa, could I just ask you to give me a sign when I'm 10 minutes from the end of my time? Because, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So how can we strengthen the institutional status of EAP? First of all, we all have to strive to make as Bond called it, language visible in university, to raise wider awareness of the importance of language in creating and disseminating knowledge. There is currently very little awareness among academics and university managers of the crucial role of language and literacy in all academic activities, and in the necessity to develop students' academic literacy within the disciplinary context. So raising awareness of the specificity of disciplinary language and that of students' real needs, which is academic literacy, raising awareness of the original mission of EAP in developing this academic literacy. And most importantly, it's necessary to raise the awareness of the potential of EAP practitioners to enhance learning and teaching of disciplinary knowledge. So the crucial role they can and should play in student support and teacher education. And also, we can strengthen the status of EAP by creating more collaborations focused on student support and potentially involving teacher education. And in a recent study, my colleague Angela Hakim and I, so we had a study, an interview study with 15 EAP practitioners and leaders in the UK. And we find out that in these collaborations, which are usually informal, subject lecturers rely a lot on advice from EAP practitioners on how to formulate assessment briefs, how to give feedback, and even classroom teaching approaches. So there is a lot of potential for teacher education. The EAP practitioner is ideally positioned and has the expertise to provide student support and teacher education. They have 3 knowledge domains: the language and discourse analysis, which enables them to access the discourses of unfamiliar disciplines. They have the pedagogical expertise, and an expertise that usually exceeds the pedagogical knowledge of many subject lecturers, because EAP practitioners as language teachers know how to teach in a student-centered way, including dialogue, interaction, and negotiation of meaning. And they have the expertise in materials development based on needs analysis. So in the area of student support, their language expertise helps them to analyze the assignment genres and then identifying students' shortcomings and needs and prepare genre analytical teaching and learning materials. In the area of teacher education, EAP practitioners have the potential to develop subject lecturers' language awareness and their understanding of the communicative functions and linguistic features of the assignment genres they set, because subject lecturers often have only a very tacit or implicit understanding of what these assignments involve. And EAP practitioners can help them to themselves develop a better understanding of the communicative purpose and linguistic features of the assignment genres, which means that subject lecturers would be enabled to write much more precise assignment briefs and give much more targeted feedback. And also, EAP practitioners can help to make subject lecturers accept some responsibility for developing students' academic literacy. So also, if there is team teaching, EAP practitioners can model student-centered teaching and assessment approaches. And this is, as I just said, already implicit in existing collaborations between EAP practitioners and subject lecturers. And there has long been a call in both areas, EMI and EAP, for the formal provision of for a formal provision of teacher education by EAP practitioners. So in the area of EMI, people have said that EAP practitioners can help content lecturers to ponder the fact that they have a special role to play when it comes to teaching in the discipline-specific language. And they have a role, they can help content lecturers in the task of disambiguating the communicative practices of the discipline for their students. However, what is the current situation? What is the current teacher education in EMI context? So it's pretty patchy and pretty bad from what I see. So the typical situation is that in many EMI universities, there is suddenly an institutional directive that tells certain programs from now on, from next year on, you have to teach your programs through English. And that means that lecturers, often those who have got degrees in Anglophone countries, who have so far taught their subject in their first language, now have to speak in English. And Yuan describes that because of linguistic insecurity, many of these lecturers then revert to teacher-centered monologic approaches because they do not feel equipped to have interactive teaching sessions through the language of English. 10 more minutes, I'll finish in 10 minutes, thank you. There is a lack of systematic training for content lecturer. In most universities, as Lazaga Buster pointed out, there's hardly any pre-service or in-service course to help practitioners cope with teaching through English, because they don't have only themselves now suddenly explain their content through English. They also have to learn what it means for their students to study through a second language and what kind of difficulties this involves. But there is no teacher training that really supports them in this. O'Dowd points out that he did a survey of, I think, 75 EMI universities and points out that the EMI teacher training programs are mainly focused on enhancing teachers' language proficiency in English, nothing to do with the pedagogy. And Dereau surveyed 25 articles focused on teacher education in EMI and found that the hastily developed teacher training programs are generally unprincipled and language oriented. So the situation isn't very good. So let's look at collaboration as a framework for teacher education that is a bit more promising than what we've got now. So first of all, a lot of partnerships are already going on, a lot of collaborations, informal collaborations are going on at universities. So they are usually targeting student support. So the EAP practitioner and the subject lecturer work together to prepare students better for assignments, for instance. But if we use this for teacher education, rather than general staff development courses, then teachers would learn how to help students with their academic literacy development within the authentic teaching context, within a specific program where the EAP practitioner could help them to include a focus on the ways of communication in the specific discipline. So there are examples of collaboration for the development of academic literacy. An older one is Sloan and Porter, who developed the SEM model, which means contextualized, embedded, and mapped, in a business school in Northumbria University. Then we have Murray, who reports from an Australian university where EAP lectures were allocated to the different faculties. So they could work with faculty staff within their teaching context. And Bond makes us aware of the fact that there are extensive and established collaborations already in existence in UK universities. However, the constraints are that the delivery of academic literacy instruction, even in these collaborations, is mostly done by EAP staff, and the collaborations are mostly informal initiatives. But to achieve an inclusive and sustainable academic literacy instruction, we have to enable subject lecturers to deliver part of this instruction themselves. And how can this be done? The EAP practitioner can play a substantial role. So if we imagine the scenario that the EAP specialist is allocated to a department to develop materials for student support, then there is collaboration with the subject specialist, who acts in the first instance as informant, providing sample essays, providing rubrics, providing marking criteria, and so on. And the EAP practitioner is then the person who analyzes the assignment genres, develops materials, prepares workshops, and consults the subject specialist on the development of these materials, in which case the subject specialist acts as a consultant. And that could be the end of the collaboration. It could be that then a workshop is delivered by the EAP specialist, and that's it. However, if we want to take it to the level of teacher education, we should aim at team teaching the session for students. So joint delivery of academic literacy workshops for students, in which scenario the EAP practitioner and the subject lecturer work as colleagues. And this could be the platform or starting point for teacher education. So in the joint delivery of academic literacy workshops, the subject lecturer learns a lot about teaching approaches, about the genre, and so on. And basically, one scenario then could be that after a few runs, the EAP practitioner hands over the materials to the subject lecturer, and the subject lecturer will do this in subsequent years. And this is a form of integration, teaching academic literacy into their practices. However, we could take it further, and the EAP practitioner could help the subject lecturer to integrate some aspects of academic literacy instruction into their regular teaching and assessment practices. And I cannot go into this, but you can read it I mean, this presentation will be disseminated. You can read it. I give you two examples. For instance, what are regular teaching practices? We all, as lecturers, ask our students to do pre-readings. Students don't do them normally, and then a very important opportunity is missed for students to enhance their academic reading and so on. So what we've done at King's, we have basically formalized pre-reading with an online forum and so on. We give pre-reading tasks. Students need to summarize articles and so on. And that has enhanced their note writing, academic reading, and so considerably. So the EAP specialist could help here. First of all, raise this idea, and then help the subject lecturer to set it up and develop the right tasks and so on. Another area is assessment, formulating assessment in a way that it's formative and helps the students to improve. There, the EAP practitioner can help substantially, help the subject specialist substantially. So I hope I'm coming to my last slides now. There are lots of barriers to EAP practitioners becoming teacher educators. Yeah, two more slides. First of all, the status of EAP, I've mentioned that before, but also there are managerial choices. EAP practitioners are shut away on inferior contracts in English language centers. But also there is resistance by subject specialists for various reasons. So how can we remove the barriers? Only if we can convince senior management to allocate EAP staff to faculties, to enhance their status, to put them on more equal footing with subject specialists. So it's a more egalitarian collaboration, and incentivize collaborations that are aimed at student support and teacher education. So basically, create institution-wide formalized collaborations between EAP practitioners and subject lecturers. And how can this be achieved? This is my last slide. This means that, first of all, EAP and EMI can't be segregated. They have to join forces to do convincing work that helps to convince senior management to encourage and incentivize this approach. So that would mean that particularly EAP managers, leaders of units, need to initiate or increase collaborative activities, showcase the benefits of collaborations, and showcase them around the university to expand participation in these activities, and create research evidence of successful collaborations and share them with faculty and department heads so that a collective case can be made to university leaderships. A difficult bottom-up approach, but we have to try. And that's the end of my presentation. The references are here. You can retrieve them later if you wish to.